she wasn't there by accident. Even though she had convinced herself otherwise, the path that led her to that street market wasn't the result of a wrong turn or a morning whim. She was far too methodical for that. She calculated steps, schedules, meetings, even silences, but fate didn't ask permission. And now there she was, the most feared woman in the investment sector, standing in front of a cheap fruit stand, being watched by a vendor who smiled as if the world were still simple. Hyun couldn't move. Her feet obeyed the ground, as if something beneath the earth was holding them in place. In front of her, the apples were arranged in almost perfect circles, red as old blood. The man behind the stand, young, simple, with a smile far too open. For her standards, was playing with the fruit, arranging them with a lightness that was almost childlike. And that's when he looked up and said, "These are the sweetest ones today. Want to try?" She didn't answer, because his voice hit her right in the center of her chest, like a distant echo. A sound she recognized not through logic, but through something more primitive. Something that had been asleep inside her for 20 years, and now seemed to awaken with a silent fury. Ji-hoon didn't know who she was. To him, she was just another client, far too elegant for that place. But there was something in her face, a shadow in the corner of her eyes, perhaps that made him hesitate. She didn't seem exactly lost, but she didn't seem comfortable either. He didn't know it, but he had seen that look before. In an old photo, in a childhood memory that never made much sense. He just smiled, more out of politeness than empathy, and pushed the basket of apples toward her. She took a step back, not out of fear, but instinct. The instinct of someone who has spent a lifetime running from a memory that was now standing there, offering an apple. Hyun was a fortress, but fortresses have cracks too. And hers began to crumble right there, between the smell of the market and the shine in his eyes. His image, now as a grown man, was different from the last memory she kept. A 5-year-old boy, skinny, with messy hair and restless curiosity in his eyes. But the gaze the gaze was the same. The exact shade of brown that the years hadn't managed to erase from her memory. A gaze that once called her mother. 20 years ago, she lost him. Or rather, she was forced to lose him. Not because she wanted to, but because someone decided for her. An unexpected pregnancy, an imminent scandal, a powerful family determined to erase all traces, and the biggest trace of all was him. The boy. The son, the heir who never knew he was born. Hyun tried to speak, but nothing came out. The words were stuck in her throat like old thorns that still cut when touched. She slowly removed her sunglasses like someone taking off armor. He noticed. And for a second, he hesitated. Because there was something in that face that touched him in a strange way. Familiar, yet distant. Like a memory you're sure is yours. But no one confirms. "Are you okay, ma'am?" he asked with the gentleness of someone who was raised by kind people. And she realized that someone had loved him. Someone had raised him with care. That should have brought relief. But it brought pain, because that someone wasn't her. Her eyes filled with tears, but she turned away before he could see. She turned her face and pretended to look at another stand. Her heart beat so loudly she could hear the sound echoing in her chest. Ji-hoon went back to adjusting the fruit, not understanding what had just happened. But her silence left something in the air. Something that would stay with him the rest of the day. When she finally turned and began to walk away, he followed her with his eyes. There was something in the way she walked, a painful elegance, a hidden sadness. And once again, a strange sensation took hold of him, as if that woman had left a piece of herself there. As if somehow she was also taking a piece of him with her. Hyun got into the car without saying a word. The driver asked if everything was okay, but she just nodded. Through the window, she saw the reflection of the market fading into the distance, But inside her, everything was drawing closer. The past, the guilt, the name she hadn't spoken aloud in years. G-Hoon. She took a small handkerchief from her pocket, with his initials embroidered. A gift from the nurse the day the baby was taken. She kept it for 2 decades, hidden in a black box at the back of a locked drawer. Today, without knowing why, she put it in her pocket before leaving. Now she understood. Nothing is by chance. Not the handkerchief. Not the street. Not that market. Fate, that cruel and perfect writer, had turned the hands of time until she was finally forced to face him. Not as the heir to a fortune. Not as the hidden son of a powerful CEO, but as a stranger behind a fruit stand, who smiled. Without knowing she was crying inside. In the back seat, she let the tear fall. It was no longer possible to hold it back. The pain, dammed up by years of silence and success, now overflowed without asking permission. And for the first time in many years, Hyun didn't try to wipe it away. She closed her eyes and saw again that little boy running in the backyard of the old house, calling out to her. A sound as clear as a scream. A sound that now echoed in the eyes of a grown man. And she knew, with a certainty that nothing else could erase, that was her son. And he didn't know it. She needed to find him again. Not there, not like that, but she needed to. Because an entire life of success wouldn't erase 20 years of absence. And because maybe there was still time to explain. Time to tell, time to hear him say anything. Even if it was too late. The car kept moving, but her heart stayed on that street. And his, even without knowing, began to beat in a different way. As if something had been awakened inside him. As if on that day, he had seen a ghost, or stumbled upon a truth he had always been looking for. Hyun picked up her phone, opened the gallery, and saw the only photo of him as a baby. The only one she saved from the family's purge. The eyes were the same. She smiled through the tears. Because now it was no longer a supposition. It was certainty. She murmured his name for the first time in many years, softly just to herself. Ji-hoon. And as if the universe had heard, he back at the market, turned his face, without reason, in the direction where the car had gone, and for a second, felt the absence of something he never had. That night fell like a heavy veil over Seoul, muffling the sound of car horns, softening the city's rush, and plunging the alleys into a rare silence. Hyun remained seated on the balcony of her 27th floor apartment, with the city lights reflected in her eyes, though she wasn't truly seeing anything. Her fingers clutched a wine glass she wasn't drinking from. Instead, she replayed the scene over and over, the sound of the market, the breeze weaving through the colorful awnings, the touch of sunlight on his face, and that smile. That damn sweet smile. The kind of smile that can't be rehearsed. Smile you learn by living, and she hadn't been there to teach it. The world knew her as the woman who never failed, the strategic leader behind million-dollar mergers, the cold mind capable of saving empires with a glance. But there, on that balcony, she was nothing more than a mother who had failed at what mattered most. G-Hoon, on the other hand, was finishing up gathering the unsold fruit. The market was already closing, and the few remaining vendors waved to one another with the silent camaraderie of those who survive one more day. He stacked the crates carefully, tying them to the cart with a worn-out elastic strap, and looked once more toward the street where she had vanished. He didn't know her name, didn't know where she came from. But something about her touched him. Something in the way she looked at him, or rather, in the way she tried not to. He wasn't the kind of person who thought too much about strangers. But now, as he pushed the heavy cart down the hill, he felt a strange restlessness, a longing that made no sense. As if he had just lost something he never knew he had. That same night, while the world slept, Hyun opened an old folder. It had been years since she touched that file. It was like opening a tomb. Inside were the clinic documents, the record of the concealed birth, the letters she never sent to him, letters she wrote on birthdays, on dates only she remembered, on nights when the company's success didn't fill the emptiness in her chest. She ran her fingers over the faded handwriting, reading as if someone else had written them. In each line, there was a desperate attempt to keep alive a connection to someone she had been forced to erase. But now, after that unexpected encounter, all those words seemed to scream, as if they demanded to be spoken. As if time were collecting on a promise she made to her own heart. Ji-hoon got home late, as usual. The small apartment was modest but neatly kept. The walls bore photos of his adoptive family, the elderly parents who had embraced him with tenderness, the younger brother with whom he had shared a childhood, and the old dog who still greeted him with joy. He took off his shoes, collapsed onto the tatami mat, and closed his eyes, but he couldn't sleep. That woman was still there, like an image superimposed on the ceiling. And then, for the first time in years, he remembered the orphanage. A specific afternoon when he asked the director why he had no baby pictures. She responded with a sad smile, like someone who had rehearsed that lie many times. Some stories begin in the middle, Ji-hoon. Ha-yoon, in her silent office, was typing compulsively. Full name of the adoptive parent, Park Sang-hoon. Adoption date, October 22nd. Location, Shinmyeong Orphanage. The records were hard to access, even with all her power. But she had always had a special talent for breaking down locked doors. In less than an hour, she had the full dossier in her hands. And there he was, Ji-hoon. The same name she had whispered in the car. The same boy she carried for 9 months with fear, for 5 years with hope, and for 20 with guilt. The same one who now sold fruit to survive, while she accumulated buildings and stocks in her name. The truth hit like a punch. The world she had built was constructed upon his absence. Every award, every headline, every magazine photo, everything had been earned at the cost of the silence she imposed on herself. And now he was there, alive, grown, as sweet as she had always imagined. But distant, she could see him. But she couldn't touch him. Not yet. Ji-hoon opened an old notebook that night. It was something he kept secret, even from his adoptive parents. A diary of questions. On its pages were scattered entries of doubts he had never been able to erase. Why does my birth certificate only start at age 5? Who gave me this name? Why do I dream about a voice I don't recognize? The questions had been there for a long time, but now they seemed to multiply. That unknown woman had triggered something. Like a key turning in a door too old to still function. But it worked. And now he couldn't go back to being the same. Meanwhile, Ha-yoon stared at her reflection in the mirror. She no longer saw the businesswoman, nor the winner, nor the untouchable woman. What she saw was a desperate mother trying to understand whether there was still time to fix something that should never have been broken. She whispered over and over, "Ji-hoon, forgive me." But the words sounded weak, because he wasn't the one who needed to hear them. And because forgiveness, sometimes, isn't enough. The next morning, he was back at the market. The same smile, the same gentle way of arranging the fruit. But something had changed. He paused more often, looked toward the street, waited, without admitting it to himself. He waited for her. And she, from the dark car parked at a distance, watched him. She didn't know how to approach. Didn't know if she should. The fear of being rejected by someone who didn't know he was supposed to love her was greater than any multi-million-dollar negotiation she had ever done. For the first time, Ha-yoon didn't know the next move, while time seemed frozen on that corner. Fate tightened the invisible knots of the plot. Their gazes crossed without meeting. And what should have been a reunion became a game of silent approaches. He felt he needed to know who she was. She felt she needed to say everything. But neither of them moved. as if the city itself kept them trapped in the same day, waiting for something or someone to break the cycle. And then, as if the universe answered, something changed. An elderly woman stumbled near the stall. Ji-hoon rushed to help her, and Ha-yoon instinctively got out of the car and ran too. It was quick. Their hands touched the woman's arm at the same time. Their eyes met again, but now, closer, more real, and for a second, the world stopped. She smiled. A timid smile, almost imperceptible. He hesitated, but returned it. And in that micro moment, the universe seemed to breathe. Because for the first time, mother and son stood side by side. And though he still didn't know, the blood running through them recognized a reunion. The touch was brief, almost accidental, but enough to ignite memories that shouldn't exist. Ji-hoon didn't understand why that contact affected him so deeply, why the warmth of that woman's hand, cold and formal, pierced through his skin like an old spark, reigniting beneath the ashes. And no matter how hard he tried to maintain his composure, her gaze destabilized him. It wasn't the kind of look you find at a market, nor the kind you give a stranger. It was a gaze filled with something that looked like pain, guilt, and tenderness all at once. Something that confused his mind, but that his body silently recognized. Ha-yoon stepped back gently, as if apologizing with her own body. She helped the elderly woman sit on a nearby bench and remain silent. It wasn't the right time yet. She knew that. But fate had taken a step forward, and now she had to walk with it. Ji-hoon came closer and thanked her for the help. She just nodded, trying to hold back the tear that threatened to fall. It was so strange to be beside him, to hear him, to feel his breath close, to see him speak gently to that woman, just as she imagined he would have done if he had grown up by her side. But he hadn't. He grew up far away. He grew up without her, and that absence throbbed like an old wound torn open. He looked at her and, for the first time, asked, "Have you been here before?" The question was simple, but loaded with intuition. As if something inside him was trying to piece things together, Ha-yoon hesitated. She could lie. She could say yes, that she often passed by. But in that moment, she chose the truth. No, today was the first time, but it won't be the last. And she smiled with her lips, not with her eyes. He felt that. It wasn't just a polite response. It was a promise. In the days that followed, she returned to the market. Always from a distance, always in silence. She watched Ji-hoon with the same intensity of a mother watching her child sleep after years apart. She saw him serve customers, play with children, share fruit with the homeless. Each of his gestures was a chapter of the life she had missed. And she absorbed everything, as if it were possible to recover 2 decades in minutes. And without knowing, he began to look for her with his eyes. It was subtle, disguised, but he waited for her, still not knowing why. Meanwhile, in the office, her partners began to notice something different. Ha-yoon, once unshakable, began to forget dates, postpone meetings, miss appointments. The woman who always had absolute control was now being interrupted by distractions too human to ignore. "Is everything okay?" one of the directors asked during a meeting. She smiled, that same restrained smile, and replied, "It's fine. I'm just dealing with something old." No one dared insist, because even weakened, her presence still commanded respect. But inside her, the empire was crumbling. Not because it was failing, but because she no longer knew if she wanted to keep building on what she had abandoned. Ji-hoon, for his part, also began to change. That unknown woman had shaken him in a way no one else ever had. He began having dreams of white hallways, a woman crying behind a door, and a soft voice calling his name. They were confusing flashes, but they returned night after night. He woke up sweating, with a pain in his chest he couldn't name. And deep down, he knew it wasn't just a dream. It was a memory. A buried memory trying to surface, One of those nights, he decided to visit his adoptive parents. He sat at the kitchen table, as he did when he was a child, and asked directly, "Do you know who my biological mother was?" The silence that followed was as dense as an old secret, too delicate to be touched. His adoptive mother lowered her gaze, and his father stirred his teacup without looking up. "We don't know much. We were told she was young, that the surrender was voluntary, and that she asked for only one thing, that you be loved." Ji-hoon felt a lump in his throat. That information wasn't new, but now it seemed to carry a different weight. "She succeeded," he said. "I was." And for the first time, his adoptive mother's eyes filled with tears. Meanwhile, Ha-yoon did the unthinkable. She scheduled an appointment with a therapist. She had never done that, always considered it a weakness. But now, she needed to understand how to approach without destroying. She sat in the chair and for an hour spoke like never before. About the lost son, about the reunion, about the fear of being rejected. The therapist listened in silence, like someone who understands that some pains can't be healed, only shared. "Are you ready to be seen by him?" the therapist asked. Ha-yoon stayed silent, because to be seen meant to be judged, and maybe to be rejected. The following week, she returned to the market, but this time with something in her hands, a small box wrapped with a simple ribbon. Inside was a pocket watch that had belonged to Ji-hoon's grandfather, the only object from the family that she kept for him. The plan was to hand it over discreetly, without saying anything. But nothing happened as planned, because when she approached the stand, he smiled differently. "I dreamed about you last night," he said, naturally. And she froze. "You dreamed?" she asked. "Yes," he replied. "But in the dream, you were younger, and you called me something else. In a way, I haven't heard since I was little." The box fell from her hands. He was startled, bent down to pick it up. When he opened it, he saw the watch, and on the back, engraved initials, KJH, the same as his full name. He fell silent, looking at her, and for the first time saw her bare eyes. And right then, he realized that this wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't charity. It wasn't just a gift. "Who are you?" he asked, not in anger, just with a void seeking an answer. She tried to speak, but the words vanished. So she took a deep breath, stepped forward slowly, and said, "I'm someone who lost you, before I ever fully knew you." He blinked, confused. The world seemed to collapse in slow motion. The sounds of the market became distant, as if submerged. The air around them grew heavier, and the watch in his hand felt like it was burning. "Are you my mother?" he asked, almost in a whisper. And she just nodded, eyes overflowing. Time stopped. He stepped back, looked at the ground, then at her, and then turned his back. He said nothing, just walked away. She didn't run, didn't beg, because she knew that was the first impact, the first collision, and that he would need space to breathe. But what she didn't know was that, as he turned the corner, he collapsed, cried like never before, an ancestral cry, a cry of absence filled with pain. When Ji-hoon turned his back and walked away without looking back, Ha-yoon stood still as if her soul had been ripped from her body. She didn't shout, didn't run, didn't beg. She just watched her son disappear down a street that seemed to have been drawn for exactly that purpose, to take him away. The world around her kept moving. Cars passed, vendors shouted offers, children ran with balloons, but inside her, everything had gone silent. It was as if time hadn't stopped for poetry, but for punishment. And in that moment, she knew. She had begun a new kind of waiting. Only this time she didn't know if the end would bring reunion or final loss. That night was long. No glass of wine, no crystal stemware, no Egyptian feather pillow was enough to dull the pain of someone who realizes that, even after everything, she might have lost again. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Ha-yoon held between her fingers the embroidered handkerchief she had carried in her pocket the day she saw him for the first time at the market. The same one she had kept with her for years, like an amulet that kept her heart from disintegrating. She pressed it against her chest like someone clutching the only proof that it had all been real, that the son existed, lived, grew up, and now might never return. Across the city, Ji-hoon wandered aimlessly. The streets he once knew looked different. The streetlights cast distorted shadows on the wet sidewalk, and each step echoed as if he were walking through a tunnel. The box with the letters and the watch was at home, but he couldn't be near it. There was too much pain inside it, even if it was the only inheritance from the woman who had just told him what he had waited his entire life to hear. And even though he didn't have the strength to hate her, he also didn't know how to forgive. Absence leaves scars, but return leaves cracks. In the days that followed, silence reigned. She didn't return to the market. He didn't go to her. They both knew where the other was, but neither moved. It was as if an invisible barrier made of 20 years of silence, guilt, and uncertainty prevented them from crossing. And the absence of the other became a constant presence. Ha-yoon, even while immersed in meetings, business deals, and dinners with shareholders, saw Ji-hoon in every face. The way a young man handed her a contract, the smile of an intern, the look of a deliveryman who greeted her in the elevator. It was as if, now that she had recognized her son, the world conspired to remind her of it constantly. One evening, Ha-yoon went to her childhood home. The family mansion had been vacant since her parents' death. That place held the ghosts of the past she always avoided, but she needed to confront them. She entered slowly, turning on lights that hadn't been lit in years. In the old bedroom, she found a photograph she thought had been discarded, her younger self, holding baby Ji-hoon, surrounded by nurses who smiled only for the picture. She wasn't smiling, because that day, she already knew it would be the last with him. She placed the image in her purse with more care than she had ever given any jewel. Meanwhile, Ji-hoon searched for answers in another way. He visited the orphanage where he had spent his early years, spoke with the former director, who still remembered him fondly. She told him about a mysterious woman who, every year, sent donations in his name, never revealed her identity, but always said, for Ji-hoon, wherever he may be, it was Ha-yoon. It always had been. Even from afar, even anonymously, she had never fully abandoned him. And that truth began to erode the certainties he once held. Back in his small apartment, Ji-hoon finally opened all the letters, one by one. He read carefully the birthdays mentioned, her fears, the dreams she imagined for him. In one of the letters, written when he would have turned 15, she said, "Today you must be discovering the world, maybe falling in love, maybe stumbling through your own choices. I'm not there to hold your hand. But every night, the only thing I wish is that, even without knowing why, you feel that you're not alone." Those were the words that made him cry for the first time. A stifled, choked, painful cry. A cry that didn't come out easily, but when it did, it brought with it 2 decades of abandonment, unanswered questions, voids that now had names, faces, voices. It was impossible to deny. She loved him, always had. Even if in a twisted, silent, and distant way. The next day, Ji-hoon returned to the market. He sold the fruit as always, but there was something different in his face. An old weariness had vanished. In its place was a steadier gaze, more curious, as if he were finally willing to understand. And on that very day, he decided to write. To her, not out of anger, not out of longing, but out of necessity. He took paper and pen and wrote just one sentence. "I'm ready to hear you, if you still want to talk." He left the note with his brother, who knew where to deliver it. Ha-eun received the note at the end of the afternoon. And when she read it, her hands trembled so much she nearly dropped it. That sentence was worth more than any contract she had ever signed. It was a beginning. Not of forgiveness, perhaps, but of a bridge. She replied that same day. She scheduled the meeting at a symbolic place, the old library where she used to study when she was pregnant. It was a neutral place, quiet, full of memories. She thought it would be easier to begin there. On the scheduled day, she arrived half an hour early. She walked among the shelves like someone walking through her own memories. She touched old spines, reread titles that marked her youth. When she heard his footsteps, her heart raced. But she didn't turn right away. She waited for him to approach, and when their eyes met, there was no need to say anything. The silence between them was more powerful than any speech. They sat facing each other. And this time, he spoke first. I didn't come looking for excuses or answers, I just came. Because something inside me still wants to know who you are. She resisted the urge to cry. I am many things, Ji-hoon. But the most important of them is that I am your mother. And I don't know how to live with what I failed to be for you. He nodded slowly, not breaking eye contact. He wanted to listen. And she began to speak. She told him about her youth, about her parents' pressure, about the scandal that would have destroyed the family. She told him about the hidden birth, the money paid for the medical team's silence, the pain of walking away and leaving behind a nameless child. She said she tried to return, but was threatened, discredited, humiliated. She said all that was left was silence. And that within that silence, she tried to go on, but never truly could. Ji-hoon listened to everything, in silence. His eyes fixed on her, but his thoughts scattered in 1,000 directions. It was hard to absorb, but not impossible. Because part of him already knew, already felt. And now everything made sense. The missing baby photos, the feeling of incompleteness, the recurring dreams of a woman crying behind a white door. It was her. It had always been her. The conversation lasted hours. They talked about everything. About his childhood, the schools he attended, the times he fell off his bike and had no one to help him. She cried for all the wounds she didn't heal. He stayed silent for all the hugs he never received. But there, in that moment, a new kind of relationship began to form. Not a relationship of a mother and son ready-made, but of two strangers who had decided not to be strangers anymore. As they left, he walked her to the car. They didn't say goodbye with a hug, not yet. But their eyes said more than gestures could. And before getting in, she said, "If one day you want to call me mother, I'll be here. But if you don't, I'll still be here." He simply smiled. And in that smile, there was something that hadn't existed before, hope. Time passed. Not as expected, but as it usually does with wounds that never fully heal. It didn't cure everything, but it allowed them to survive. After that day at the library, Ha-yoon and Ji-hoon started seeing each other more often. At first, the meetings were short, almost formal, as if they were still walking on shards of glass. But over time, they found ways to be in each other's presence without hurting so much. There was no plan, no sequence, no guarantees. But there was space. And space, for hearts that had waited so long, was more than enough. She started showing up at the market on Tuesdays. It wasn't planned. She would just appear, buy 2 apples, say something trivial, and leave. Sometimes he replied. Other times he just smiled faintly. But each gesture, no matter how small, was a brick in the reconstruction of the bridge they had long pretended was impossible to build. The silence between them was no longer filled with pain. It had become a kind of mutual respect for everything they still didn't know how to say out loud. Once, he shared that he loved drawing as a child, that he used to hide his sketchbooks out of fear of seeming weak. Ha-yoon moved, had the old art room in the family home restored, the same one where she used to draw in her youth. When he arrived and saw the easel, the paints, and a new notebook with his name embroidered on the cover, he said nothing. He simply sat down, opened the first page, and began to draw. She stood nearby, watching, her heart full of pride and guilt. It was like watching time rewind, but this time, with a chance not to fail. His adoptive parents were the first to notice the change. Ji-hoon, always discreet, had become lighter, though he still carried in his eyes a world of unresolved things. He told them, gently, who Hae-yoon was. They listened silently, and in the end, his adoptive mother, who had raised him as if from her own womb, simply held his hand and said, "Love doesn't have just one form. If she loves you, there's a place." It was all he needed to hear, not to decide, but to accept that he didn't have to choose between one past and another. Both fit inside him. The months went by, and with them came the first shared memories. She told him about how he used to kick inside her belly, the song she played for him, the one time she dressed him herself before he was taken away. He, in turn, showed her childhood photos, told her about falling from a tree at 7, and how he learned to make lemonade with his adoptive father. The stories didn't fit together like a perfect puzzle. There were gaps, missing pieces. But there was also a new narrative forming, one of trying. Little by little, Ji-hoon started calling her by name less often. Sometimes he'd say, "you," and other times, nothing. But one night, as they ended a short phone call, he said, "Good night, Iyama." It was so soft she might not have even heard it. But he did, and the world around him seemed to calm. Just for a moment. As if he had finally found a piece of what he'd always been searching for. Hae-yoon, hearing that, even if she wasn't sure she had, stayed awake all night. She walked over to the old crib she had restored and placed. Inside it, one of the apples she had bought at the market, already aged, just to remind herself that some things ripen late, but are still sweet. For the first time in years, she fell asleep smiling. They didn't become a traditional family. They didn't celebrate dates with parties, nor did they have framed photos in perfect chronological order, but they created their own rituals. On Fridays, they'd have lunch at the same small restaurant near the market. At the end of the month, she'd bring a different book and leave it with him, with a handwritten dedication. In return, he'd give her a new illustration with some subtle element that referenced her. It was as if each offered fragments of who they were, hoping the other would know what to do with them. One day, Ji-hoon took Hae-yoon to the top of a hill where he used to go alone as a child. He said that even without knowing why, he liked to look at the city from there and imagine that someone, somewhere was doing the same. "Maybe it was you," he said. She didn't answer. She just held his hand for the first time. Without fear, without pain, without shame. And he didn't let go. With time he discovered that blood says a lot, but not everything. That a bond isn't born only from biology, but from the daily choice to stay. And she discovered that a mother's love doesn't die, even when buried. It hibernates, waits, and when it finds the child again, even 20 years later, it still knows the way back. They kept on living, separate, but close. Different, but connected. Sometimes they talked for hours. Other times they didn't see each other for weeks. But the pain of that first meeting faded into the past, replaced by a quiet acceptance that what they had was little, but still, it was something. And for those who've known nothing, something is a miracle. The following spring, he invited her to visit his new fruit stand, bigger, more organized, with a modest sign that read, Ji-hoon's Garden. She laughed when she saw the name. "That's too much English for you." He laughed too. "It was your idea. You just forgot how much you influenced me." At the stand, one of the featured fruits was an apple with a label that read, "Today's sweetest." And both of them knew that was his quiet way of saying, "You stayed." One day, sitting by the Han River, he asked if she regretted anything. She answered without hesitation, "I regret the silence. But never loving you, not a single day." He just stared at the reflection in the water, said nothing, but picked up a small stone and threw it hard across the surface. 7 ripples. 7 like the years he most felt her absence. And for the first time, he let the tear fall, unhurried. She, seeing that, didn't try to comfort him. She knew some pains don't want to be interrupted. They just need to be witnessed. And there, beside her son, without needing to touch him, she felt like a mother for the first time completely, not because he called her that, but because he trusted her enough to cry. A few months later, she invited him to visit the old office where she once led everything. "It's yours now, if you want it," he declined gracefully. "I already have my own world. I just wanted to know if I can build it with you nearby." She understood what he meant. He didn't want inheritance. He wanted presence. And that, finally, she could offer without fear. At the end of that year, he brought her a box. Inside was a drawing. A child running through a market, a well-dressed woman watching from afar, and a line between them, not a straight one, but a curve full of bends. "This is our path," he said. She held the drawing like it was a treasure. Because it was. On an ordinary day, as they walked down a random street, he held her arm while crossing. It was instinctive. But in that simple gesture, there was a world of reparations. She looked at him and smiled, and he smiled back. And in that second, time closed in. The past, the present, and the future embraced within a single glance. They never said "I love you" out loud. But they never had to. Every Tuesday, she still bought the 2 apples. Every Friday, he still drew something new. And between one thing and another, they kept writing, in silent everyday moments. A story no newspaper would ever tell, but which, for the 2 of them, was the kind of story time doesn't erase. And then, at the end of just another day, he walked her to the car, like always. Before getting in, she turned to him and asked, "If I had come earlier, would you have accepted me?" He stayed silent for several long seconds, looking at her with the same eyes as the 5-year-old boy she had lost. And then he replied, "I don't know, but I know you came. And that, today, is all that matters." She got into the car. He kept watching her reflection in the window until it disappeared. And that night, before sleeping, he drew a new picture, a mother walking away through the market, while a young man watches her from a distance. In the corner of the paper, he wrote, "It took time. But now I know she never stopped looking for me." And what about you? Would you be able to forgive someone who disappeared for 20 years, but never stopped loving you? Drop your comment below. I read every single one. And if this story touched your heart, share it with someone you love before it's too late.